Hey there everybody, Brandon here coming to you again from the channel. Appreciate you stopping by. As you can see here, we're having a lovely weather day where I'm at. But as they say, April's showers bring May flowers. So we are going to be looking at some flowers in this video. Some wildflowers and a daylily. I'm going to be painting these on a stone paver. So let's go check that out now. Alright, so what I have here is a stone paver. This is like a what you would put out maybe for landscaping on around your house, backyard, sidewalk kind of thing. It's a stone paver that I'm going to be painting this on for a project for someone. And so we're just going to be using acrylic paints. I'm going to start with one of my old trusty wash brushes that I have worn down over time. And I'm going to paint a perimeter here of just a dark green kind of background to lay in some flowers around the perimeter of this. So let's have a look at that process now. So what I have here now is just some green mixed in with a little touch of black and some burnt umber here to darken it up. And I'm just using this wash brush here to tap in this dark color around the perimeter of this stone tablet. Now I'm going to be turning this brush as I'm tapping it and rotating it just to create some different shapes and textures in here. And I'm not going to make it completely solid, obviously. I want to leave a little bit of gaps here and there. This is just going to be basically like some wildflowers that are growing on a vine type situation, I guess. So I'm just going to continue to tap this color in all the way around the perimeter of this stone tablet. So to finish this up here across the top here, again, I've worked my way all the way around this stone tablet, just tapping and touching this dark color in. Nothing real specific here, just creating some basic background shape that I will then come back and put in a little bit of highlight to define out some individual leaf textures in here, and then ultimately be painting some small flowers on top of it. The flowers are going to be a white flower. It was a very specific request for this project from the customer. Wanted some small white star-shaped flowers on this perimeter, and then there will be a larger flower ultimately in the bottom left corner. So then just finishing this here up, getting the color all the way around the edges, finishing up with this dark green, and then again we're going to come back in with some highlight passes to find out a few individual leaf structures here, and maybe a touch or two of the vines itself drawn in this as well. So this is going to complete the perimeter of the blocking in color phase first. So now I'm going to come in here and just define out some of these edges a little bit with a leaf kind of extending out in some random places. So I'm just going to use the end of this wash brush here just to bring that dark green color out just a little bit, protrusion here along some of these places. Nothing real specific, again, just creating a couple of areas where these things poke out a little bit just to kind of break up the monotony in some of this. And then we're going to come back in here and highlight some of these out to create some individual leaf structure. So I'm going to come in here now with, I've put just a touch of yellow in on my green mix to brighten it up, and I'm just going to tap in initially a couple of just random places. This is just to kind of break things up, create some shapes in here, some things that are going to be not well defined, but at least showing you there's different layers here of leaves going on, and then ultimately I'll come back and pick out some very specific ones here when it's all said and done. Now with a much smaller brush here, I'm going to draw in some pieces of what would be like part of the vine itself here that this is all growing on, just in some random places along the edge. So just a little bit of a mixture here of some brown with a touch of titanium white to kind of lighten it up. Again, nothing that I have to worry about any specific detail on here, just giving some indication into some areas here that there is something growing through here that these leaves and these flowers are hanging off of. Just something to add out to the overall appeal of this project. That's all this is. Now to highlight out these leaves here, I've gone back to my wash brush and again just added a tiny bit of yellow here to my green mix to give me a highlight color here, and then just on a few places here, just a quick tap and a touch of the edge of this brush where some light is catching some of these angles on these leaves, just to break it up a little bit again, add some highlight here and there. This is pretty random. You don't have to get real specific on something like this because I'm not going for high level of detail here. We're just going for an overall look to the finished project here. Now I've switched over to a smaller brush to come in here in this highlight color and lay in some lines of highlight here that create a little bit sharper edges on a few places here to where maybe some creases are on these leaves, kind of where the main veins run through them, just so we have a couple of hard edges in here of highlight as opposed to everything just kind of being a softer edge, just something to break it up just a little bit. Now I'm going to start adding in the flowers themselves. So I'm going to be using this small brush again, and this is just kind of basically a gray color, so a shadow color for a white flower here, just a white with a touch of black in it here, and we're going to be drawing in essentially what is a star-shaped flower here. So kind of 5 petals that are branching out from a center point. And again, this is just a shadow color that I will be laying in white on top of to create the final look here. So this is creating a basic shape, and these flowers are 5-petal flowers. They do have a little bit of curvature to the petals themselves, so I'm not worried about creating a real hard triangular look here. I just do need to create the 5 individual petals and then come back in with a pass of highlight that will create the final look here. So this is just getting in the basic shape from a central point here, bringing out 5 petals, drawing this in, and then we're going to replicate this just in random places throughout this green leaf background we have dropped in. So there's one final one, and I'm going to vary the size of these, so there'll be some smaller ones and some larger ones, and we're just going to put them in at random along this perimeter, and then we'll come back and highlight them out and hopefully get the look that we're going for when it comes to these white flowers that are growing along this. Maybe just drop one more small one down in here, and then we'll start to show what the highlight pass looks like. Now I'm going to go into mostly just titanium white here. And we don't want to kill all this gray, but we do want to come in from these outer edges and bring in this brighter color. And then in the center itself, I'm going to leave that gray where it's essentially the center portion of the flower where these things branch out from. So I'm just going to kind of paint in these outer tips first, and then as the brush kind of loses its paint towards the middle, it'll kind of create the fade that I'm looking for in terms of leaving the center portion of these individual flowers that darker shaded color to create the look that we're going for. And we're going to have to highlight every one of these, obviously, maybe slightly different in terms of how much highlight color we put in on each one of these. They don't all have to be completely the same. Obviously, we don't want that really. So I'm just going to go one at a time around the perimeter of this, highlighting each individual flower out and making them fairly uniform, but at the same time not exactly the same, because we know things in nature obviously all don't look the same. So we don't want to do the same thing in our painting as to make it look more natural. The key here is to not just come in here and paint all over your shadow color and get rid of all of your dark. You've got to leave some behind. So I find it easier to start on the edges where I want the brightest, and then just let the brush naturally lose paint and color as I move towards the middle or any place that I want to leave as a shadowed effect. Now that I have a pretty good perimeter of this, I've decided in a few areas to come in here and really create a clump. So I'm going to use this smaller brush to go back into my gray shadowed color, and I'm going to fill in a lot of this area here in between these flowers that I've already highlighted out, because I'm going to create a much thicker cluster in several areas along the top of this. I just think it'll make the overall project look better. So I'm going to fill in a lot of this shadow color here in this middle section, and then I'm going to do the same thing in the corners, and then we will go back and pick out some individual flowers in the middle of this, and hopefully create a little better overall finished product. So again, I'm just filling in a lot of this in between spaces here in this green. I'm just bringing this gray shadowed color in here, blocking it in, because there's going to be a whole handful of flowers all shoved in here together. So you don't have to be real specific at all about what you're doing in this kind of instance. And then we're going to come back in and pick out some individual ones with our brighter highlight color. Now we're going to come back in here where we have blocked in a lot of this background color and pick out some individual flowers here. So again, using the brighter white highlight, I'm going to define out individual flower petals here, trying to stick with my theme of a star-shaped flower here. Now some of these are going to be overlapping, so we're just going to kind of paint in a star-shaped flower here and there in some of these bigger areas, and then leave a lot of that gray separating some, and then where some overlap behind it, so we can create essentially what looks like a cluster of flowers here all together. The main thing is not to get too carried away with your highlight to where you just create a big bright white blob in here, and then you can't really define anything out. So pick out some individual places to put your highlight color in, and then leave plenty of your shadow color behind to separate out some individual layers. And you want to kind of make some different sizes in here as well, so some larger than others, some smaller than others. Create a variety, and again, just add to the overall finished product. So you can see here I'm just individual pointy flower petal shapes is all I'm going after at this point. Very randomly putting these things in. And in some cases here I may not even do a full flower, since we have some overlap. I might just pick out a few pointed looking places to drop in, not worrying about whether or not I get all 5 in on an individual flower here, because you may not be able to see in a cluster like this all 5 of them. Obviously you probably wouldn't, so we don't have to even worry about that at this point. So now I think we've accomplished a pretty good cluster here of flowers in these corners, giving a better overall look. Now I'm going to move to this bottom left corner here with my wash brush, and I'm coming in here with basically a brown, because I am going to be painting what essentially is a pink daylily in this bottom corner. And to create the pink, I've got to have a darker shadowed color here, so I'm going to come in here with this wash brush, and I'm going to tap in essentially a shape of the individual flower petals of what is a blooming daylily here in this bottom corner. Now I'll come back with a lighter color of a pink to define out these individual petals. So right now I'm just trying to get a basic shape down, using a reference photo here to get the shape correct of what a daylily is looking like. So there's some petals that basically droop off the sides, and then a couple that come off the top that create a nice looking flower when it is in full bloom. And this darker shadowed color here will then allow us to come in with our highlight pass and create the look that we're going for. So with this wash brush, I don't have to get real specific other than a basic shape. I'm also now going to come in with a much smaller brush here to define out some very specific edges of the shape of this daylily here. Just giving me a little bit better detail with the smaller brush, being able to paint a little smaller, finer line. I want to capture the fact that these individual petals do kind of come up and then droop over, so I'm using the smaller brush to be able to paint in those shapes and those arches essentially. Now with the background in, I'm going to come in with my pink mix, which really is just a mix of this brown that I've been using with red now in it, and then a touch of white to lighten it up. And we're going to start to paint in the actual highlight shapes of this flower. Some of this area is going to be catching a little bit more light than the others to create this shape, so I'm going to come back in ultimately with a highlight pass of even a brighter highlight color with more white mixed in on some of these edges. But for right now, it is just defining out our pink petals. So again, this is a painting I'm doing on a piece of stone tablet, so I'm not painting on canvas here, which makes this a little bit different in not having to worry about very specific detail. But I do want to keep my brush strokes here in the same direction to create the look of this flower petal. And as I'm painting this flower out, the center portion of this is going to be a mixture of some yellow and green. So I'm really only worried about this pink color on the outer 2/3 of these petals. So that's why I'm painting from the tips basically inward, where I'm going to have a different color on the interior of this flower anyway. Again, keeping my brush strokes kind of in the same direction here to create what looks like flower petal veins, I think just adds to the overall realism of the finished product. I'm going to speed this up a little bit here, but you'll see that my process here on each individual petal is going to remain the same. I'm going to drag this pink color across each petal, keeping the brush strokes relatively in the same directions, and then once I get it all filled in, we'll come back in with a final highlight pass or two to really define out the areas of this petal. Now I'm going to come in here in the center portion here and bring out some yellow, And again, keeping in the same direction of each individual petal of this flower, I'm going to start in the center and then drag this yellow color out towards the pink. And then as the brush kind of loses its paint here, it'll kind of naturally create a little bit of a fade here between the yellow and the pink. And I will start back in the center and then move out towards the direction of each petal here I'm trying to define out. And then some of these that are overlapping on the top, I might make just a touch brighter than the others to create a little bit of that overlap look. We'll make just a couple of passes here where I'm going to brighten up again the flower petals that are overlapping on the top. I will make just a little bit brighter than the ones underneath to create that separation. But the idea here is the same. We're going to drag this color out, let it fade naturally into the pink that we already have. And then the last pass here to come back in with the brightest to define out those edges of the flowers that are on the, or the petals, I'm sorry, that are on the top. And you can start to see that separation here now by bringing in the brightest yellow on a couple of these. It'll create some separation between this and the ones that are underneath it. Now with adding just a little bit of white to our pink mixture here, I'm going to come in with this small brush and just really define out some edges of some of these petals themselves, and then maybe a few places internally on them, or maybe a vein or two is running and some light is catching, just to create a little bit of pop along the edges of these things and make this thing stand out a little bit better. So this petal here on this left is obviously kind of folded and leaning over, so this leading edge here I'm going to paint out with this highlight color to kind of create that look and that contrast. Further enhance the fact that it is a folded over petal there. Also along the top where this thing is bent, where the light would be catching it along the edge. In any place you can define out a separation between edges of where things are going on like this, it helps create that dimensionality you're looking for in terms of something that is closer to the viewer in the foreground, something that is further away. So even though it's a small change here on this flower, we can create that three-dimensional look to it with separation. And we can define out the edges here to make this thing jump a little more forward over the green leaves that we have behind it as well, just by coming along these edges, creating a little bit of highlight pop along some of it to make this thing stand out. And I'm not just painting a solid line along these edges. You'll note here I'm kind of skipping around a little bit, touching it a little bit here and there, not completely covering the edges. Again, just adds to the overall realistic look to the finished product, in my opinion. Then we're going to come into the center now and get this green that's kind of right at the center brought out. So basically just putting a little bit of green here in the middle, fading it in a little bit, using a touch of water here, blending that in some as it moves into the green, or from the green to this yellow. And I think I want to go just a little bit darker with this center here. So I put just a touch of raw umber into that green mix here so I can darken this up some. And then I will work the edges of it here to fade it in, creating a nice darker center to this flower that we will be able to then come back and put the final touches on. Now I'm going to come back in here. I think I want to add a few bit more highlights to the pink petals themselves. I'm going back to my small brush here with a little bit of this white highlight here, and I'm going to draw a couple of veins down the center of these petals here. And just the last little bit of character to each petal. Just some random places where the light might be catching. Just to add the last little bit of realistic touch to it. Just kind of makes me happy, right? So that's all I'm really doing here. Probably could have left it if you wanted to the way I had it, and it would have been just fine, but I like to add just a little bit of something to it, just dragging in a couple of bits of highlight here and there just to break it up. And the last little thing to do here is to draw in a few of these small internal parts here to this flower here, coming in on top of this darker green that I put in, so you can actually see some contrast and some change here. So here in the middle we're essentially painting a lighter color over the darker color, so you'll be able to see it. And now as we move over the yellow part of the flower, we will flip that and we will put just a little bit of a darker color in. As you can see, as I extend this light stuff here over to the yellow, you're not really going to be able to see it, so I'll come in here now, which is a tiny bit of that raw umber, and here now I can touch that in on top of that yellow, and then we have a contrast. So paint the light over the dark and then the dark over the light, and you will be able to define out a few things here in the middle. It just creates the finished product of that daylily. So I think for now we're going to call that a finished product. So daylily here in the corner. The rest of this stone tablet here again is just some wildflowers essentially growing a type of a vine here. But this is what the customer had requested, so I hope you enjoyed painting along and seeing that. Till next time, happy painting, everybody.